questions, and when Reginald comes in, I can also talk to him as well. Otherwise, we're gonna open this up for a discussion. This is not a debate. This is not about arguing with each other, but if we do have differences of opinions, hopefully this will be a shared, safe place where we're able to talk, where we're able to, bring our own experiences. Many people here are native Washingtonians. Some people came here by choice. So it's very important for us to all feel welcome in this setting. So last but not least, if people want to sit in these front chairs, this couch right here, that's perfectly okay as well, especially for folks who come in, a little bit later. So, don't feel afraid to get too close to us. We don't bite too hard. So I have the pleasure of introducing to you Amber Harding, who's the executive director for the Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless, who has been in the role for 2 months. With the company for how many years?
20 years.
20 years. So she knows a lot about the organization, and I'm very excited for her to share at least her beginning experience as executive director. But I'm going to read her biography as well. So before being appointed executive director, much of Amber's work has focused on enforcing DC's legal and policy commitments to safe and appropriate shelter. She also works to increase civil rights protections for people experiencing homelessness, including reducing barriers in shelter and housing for people with disabilities, people with criminal records, and people with poor credit and rental histories. She advocates for increasing funding for affordable housing as the primary solution to homelessness. And she's also on the steering committee for the Way Home campaign. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And we have a lot of questions. I'm not sure if you've seen them, so I'm going to ask them really fast, and so you have a hard time answering. But I'm going to ask you for first. I just want to tell us a little bit about you, your role that you're in now, and your experiences as a legal clinic for homeless.
Sure. So first, I will say I'm a lawyer and I like to argue, so bring it on. I don't take disagreements personally. I really don't. So to me, the debate is part of how we make a better world and figure out whether we all have stuff we can work on together. So really push me as hard as you want, and we'll try to come up with good answers. I was not born in DC. I grew up in Arizona. I came out here to go to law school, and then I fell in love with the city, and I stayed, and I moved out here in 2000, so I've been here for 23 years. When I graduated from law school, I went to the legal clinic for the homeless, and I never left. So it's a short story of my career. But I actually came to law school to work on homelessness and to work on, in particular, the civil rights of people who are homeless. So when I was in Arizona, I worked with homeless youth who were experiencing civil rights violations, police misconduct, a lot of abuse by police, a lot of discrimination by businesses. And it was just a life-changing experience for me to spend time with youth and hear their stories, how they became homeless, what they were going through, and really how they had no legal rights, how nobody really cared, that people weren't able to access basic needs or programs, and even when they had money, they weren't allowed to spend it in businesses. And so that's what I came here to work on, and learned that DC was a place that had many, many challenges, many lovely things too, but really a big challenge to work on ending homelessness. And so I am a lawyer. I've done a lot of litigation. Eventually, over time, I started working more on policy because I saw that the courts weren't a particularly fair place for my clients to be either. Most of our institutions really are poisoned by all the biases that we all have in this community. It makes it very hard to really achieve real justice for people. And so a lot of my focus came to be on changing laws and increasing funding for programs. Because in DC, I'm going to go ahead and answer one of your questions you're going to ask me about affordable housing.
Sure.
In DC, homelessness is really, homelessness can be complicated, but in DC, the primary cause of homelessness is literally just a gap between how much income people have and how much housing costs. That's as pure and simple as that. There might be mental health issues, might be substance abuse issues, there might be education issues, but those are not actually the primary causes of homelessness in DC. Those are sort of secondary issues in people's lives that can be resolved when people are in housing. But even if you resolve all those things, if you don't resolve that giant gap between income and housing, you still have homelessness. So that's a majority of what we spend our time doing at the legal clinic. We do direct legal services. We do a lot of client education. We do a lot of policy work. We don't take any government money. And part of that is that for our clients, the primary adversary in their lives is the government. So we want to be able to speak truth to power, and we want our clients to feel that we are 100% on their side. And so it's really important to us to like stand fully with our client community and in our advocacy. And so we've been around for 37 years, and we are ever evolving and learning as much as anybody else is about what the best solutions are out there.
So, first of all, awesome answer. You're the newly crowned executive director. Tell us what a day.
Wish I had a crown.
Tell me what a day in the life of an executive director looks like.
Oh, it's not as much fun as I thought it would be. I probably my old job better. No, I'm just kidding. A lot of it is like, it's really varied. A lot of it is I still do some advocacy. Today I had a call where I was talking about immigration and what's happening with all the people that were bused to DC, and do they count as homeless, and what is their long-term plan for housing. And I had a call with our legal team about the fact that we need more volunteers. We aren't meeting people's needs as quickly as we want to, and we rely a lot on pro bono work in the city to get that done. Some of that over the period of the pandemic has declined, and so we have to like amp up trying to get firms to really engage with us again and lend us their talents. And then I spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to ask people for money, which is not a strength of mine. Real uncomfortable doing that. So that is my growing edge as a person. But we have great stuff, really passionate people. And a lot of it is just, learning how to support people and make sure that they can like take their talents, and everyone is so committed to the mission, and that they can like really, maximize their potential and get stuff done.
So if anybody out here knows how to raise a lot of money,
Yeah.
and wants to become a developmental manager, director,
We have a great team, but we could always use more help.
Certainly. So I'm gonna go to the next question.
Yep.
And I think you've already probably answered already. It's gonna be about an overview of the housing crisis. How do you see the housing, from your perspective, how do you see the housing affordability crisis? And who does this affect, and in what way? And what are the consequences for the city?
Yeah, so that's a big question.
Yeah.
Let's try to break that down into little bites. I have 2 kids and I live in Brooklyn. And so I want to actually answer the last part first, maybe who it affects. Like, I think it affects everybody. I mean, I see people move out of the city when they have kids. Like, you see that all the time because there's hardly any affordable family housing out there. In particular, you see people that are like, oh, we'll have more space if we move out, but a lot of it really is about money and what people can afford. So that affects me, it affects my kids, it affects my community, it affects how much of a community we are. We're always sort of like cycling people in and out. When I go to like community events and I tell people, like politicians, I want affordable housing in my community, they don't believe me. They tell me like to take off my advocacy hat, and I'm like, no, really, I want affordable housing in the community, and I just don't think people hear that enough. But I think like one of the issues in DC is that there's, in the pandemic, people really focused on housing, I think more than we had had in a really long time. Like housing as a health intervention, right? Like there was all this messaging about stay at home, just like kind of hard in the world I work in because people don't have homes. How are they supposed to stay safe? And there's this whole just disparity in like what people could do to keep themselves safe in the pandemic. But then there was like an understanding there's a huge infusion of money to keep people in their homes with eviction prevention money and things like that. But then at the same time, private landlords, even though people had less income and the economy was struggling and housing was super important, they raised their rents during that time period, like a lot. And we don't have real rent control in this city. It's very limited. There are no caps sort of on profit for landlords. And so you see that, these are my personal opinion, I'm not an economist, but like, you see that the free market doesn't work. It doesn't produce what people need to survive. Doesn't produce family housing in the amount people need. It doesn't produce low income housing. It doesn't naturally produce to people's needs. It produces to profit. So it produces luxury housing, efficiencies in one bedrooms. Doesn't produce like wheelchair accessible housing or senior living, or, like all those things we know we need in the community aren't like naturally occurring real estate.
Mhm.
They have to be prompted by government intervention to happen. And I just don't think we've done enough of that in this city. And so we often talk about, you guys are young Democrats, so I'm gonna expose my age. We're talking about like Anthony Williams,
Right.
and how he was really focused on bringing in 100,000 new residents into the city. And what did that do to the city to have all that focus on bringing in new residents, but not the focus on sustaining the people's lives who are living, not about making it a city where people could stay. And so there's all this shifting, and we're like the highest gentrification, highest displacement of Black residents in the country. We lost 20,000 Black households in a decade in DC, to many to outlying, suburbs. But like, those are policy choices that people make that have consequences. And but people act like it's just like a natural thing that happens in the market, that like some people, they leave when they can't afford it. But I think there are like really intentional things we can do to change that narrative.
So I want to touch on the last point you made, because a lot of people tell me, especially when I leave DC to other areas, that gentrification is inevitable, displacement is inevitable. But you just mentioned that if we use intentional actions, we can kind of curb that or reduce the rate of that. What do you think could politicians or folks do to stem gentrification and displacement?
Yeah, so first, I will say something I never really understood until recently, is just the distinction between economic development and gentrification. So you could have economic development without gentrification. It can look like, bringing a grocery store into a community, or, building new housing, but not that displaces people. Like, gentrification is really about taking neighborhoods, and it usually has a race connotation that you are whitening the neighborhood and displacing generally low income Black families. But I think it's the $1 million question of how you do economic development without gentrification. No one has really cracked this. But I think one of the ways you do it is you build ownership in communities. It's harder to displace people when they have an ownership interest in businesses and in housing. So that can be like co-op models and things like that. It can also be businesses that are catered to the people who currently live in the community. So a lot of times you'll see that people will try to incentivize businesses to come to the community that are going to bring new people to the community. And that is a gentrification almost guarantee. But bringing businesses to the community that the community has said they need, like that grocery store, that Black owned business, supporting the current smaller businesses that are in the area, are ways of having economic development without having displacement.
Okay. Now, there's been a lot of push to buy Black. But oftentimes, those businesses have a hard time staying in DC, whether it's applying for grants, whether it's having folks who can pay the usual higher cost because they can't buy it bulk compared to a Walmart. How do you sell a Black-owned business moving into a marginalized neighborhood without the guarantee of financial support, whether it's from the government or grants or whatnot?
Yeah, I mean, I'm I'm just gonna like pontificate, this is not my area, my area is, I'm not like an economic development person, but like, I do think that there are ways to have like rent control for businesses, for like Black-owned businesses and things like that. And I think there are ways to, like I said, have community investment, like, you know, you have businesses when they're more integrated in the neighborhood, when they hire local, and I mean like uber local, like really like hiring neighbors, when they get involved in like training programs and things with the, you know, other places and the services in the neighborhood, like you see them get more integrated into the neighborhood, they tend to stay, they tend to build a community around them that supports them. I don't think there's any like kind of magic bullet approach to it, but I do think it involves like a reset of your thinking, not your thinking, of one's thinking. Because people don't shoot for that. They shoot for bringing new people into the neighborhood, and then that there's sort of like that will somehow raise everyone's income and make things better. And like that hasn't been the case. Like we've seen it over and over again. That there are a couple of myths out there. One of them is that economic development, like, you know, leads to better jobs and better lives for the people in that neighborhood. And when in reality, many of them get displaced. But another myth is that like if you build more housing, there will be more affordable housing. DC is like an excellent example of how that is not true. We have so much housing, much of it is vacant and much of it is luxury. And it has not even cracked the affordable housing problem. So I think people just have to be like very deliberate. There are some models out there where people are trying to do more. You know, the other thing that happens sometimes in neighborhoods is like you bring there's a lot of like racism in city services and so like you'll bring like a grocery store into a neighborhood and it doesn't get the same services as grocery stores that are in like Northwest, right? So like then it starts to decline, and then people don't want to go there anymore, and then people aren't like invested in it, and the business closes. So it's like it has to kind of, you have to like wrap all those things around it, I think, to really like keep that business and keep that community connected.
Gotcha. Rebecca, maybe we could also take some questions from the audience.
Yeah, I was just about to get to that. I was gonna break the mood a little bit. If anybody want to raise their hand, ask a quick question, but before you ask that question, just tell us who you are, why you're here, and say a little bit about you, and then ask your question. We're gonna try to get like 30 seconds into the question. So sometimes people have, especially I live in Ward 8, people have the tendency to give in their answer, their comments, and then you're like, wait, what's the question? So we're gonna have a comment section afterwards as well. But if anyone has a question, please raise your hand. Tell us a little bit about who you are, and then ready to go. Yeah, thank you.
Make a question and then I have a comment later. I'll wait for others to.
Yeah.
To find affordable housing, because I remember being a young, I'm the older.
We gotta have a name first.
I'm sorry, I'm Monica Roche, at-large committee woman, DC Democrats, Ward 2, vice chair of Ward 2. And so fifth generation Ward 2 resident. That's meaningful also when you think about how much expensive Ward 2 is. So before I'll make my comment, like I said, I'll wait for my comment, but can you just define affordable housing? Because I remember, I would guarantee, I don't know what people do in this room, but I would guarantee that none of us could afford affordable housing. And so that puts us in the $1 million condo, studio box. And so that doesn't even apply to working professional often.
Yeah.
So just we can kind of just talk about that a little bit.
I mean, that's such an important question because people throw out affordable housing all the time, and like any politician who ever says affordable housing should ask that question. Like, what do you mean by affordable housing? When I say affordable housing, I mean affordable to the person. So I mean like the person isn't paying more than 30% of their income in rent. But when the city talks about affordable housing, they're often talking about these ranges. So there's like deeply affordable housing, which is the housing that's affordable at the lowest income. And the income bands are done by area median income, which is like a HUD standard. So the lowest band is 0 to 30%. And then it goes, I think 30 to 50 and then 50 to 80%. anything below, sometimes people say in the city, anything below 120% of area median income is affordable housing. But that is over 6 figures salary, right? The reason it's like so important to know that is because like a lot of our tax dollars go to programs that create affordable housing. And over time, we've learned that the city overdevelops affordable housing at those high income bands and underdevelops it at low income bands. And so like, then you're like, oh, well, that's why all these people don't have housing, because we said we were doing it. We didn't.
Hey, it's hard to find this place.
No worries, no worries. And I wanted to follow up on something Monica said. Can you explain how AMI is calculated for DC?
No. No, it's like, I don't know. It's like, so area median income for DC is a regional thing.
Mhm.
So it's like the suburbs and us, which also like inflates like the bands, right? And so but it's like a HUD thing. There have been talks about trying to have just like a DC median income, but because HUD sets it, it throws off all of like the way we apply for federal funds and you know, honestly. So like, that's why I stick to the like real basic, like, can my clients afford to rent by only paying 30% of their income? And I focus on the deeply affordable housing. I don't go above 30% in my advocacy.
Right, and one thing I was just trying to opine is to let everybody know that the AMI is also calculated by people who are living in Virginia and Maryland. Especially you start thinking about Northern Virginia and how the income compares to folks living in Southeast Washington, DC, Northeast Washington, DC as well.
If I may, with the AMI thing, right? So HUD has in its regulations that 1/3 of a person's income is affordable to them. So what they've done is created this medium range for calculating highest and lowest incomes in the region. Then that gives you the median, what the average is by, you know, taking the highest income in an area and the lowest income in the area and saying, you know, how you do mediums and modes, using that formula to say, okay, this is 1/3 of this person's income. So now you have sort of like a threshold to get to. If you look at 30% MFI or AMI, whichever you choose, but DC, you'll see that most people who are on the fixed income levels like SSI and retirement, that's really not what their income is. It's more like 15 to 5% AMI. And the thing about DC, which is kind of why statehood is good and bad, is like, because there's 3 AMIs. So it's highest and lowest with Maryland, highest and lowest with Virginia, highest and lowest of DC, and then the middle of the 3 together.
Right.
So it skews what really the income is. If you look at the income downstairs, you'll be like, okay, nope, none of them, and they're making them, you know, minimum wage, and they're still not at what 30% really supposed to be, or 35 or 40% supposed to be. It's skewed.
This is why my brother Reggie Black is here. I met this guy about what, 2-3 years ago on outside at a fair. And when you start talking about advocate, when you start talking about a leader, you realize you don't need to be an elected official to be a leader of people. You know, you don't have to have a title to consider yourself someone who pushes the community. And that's somebody I see in Reginald Black. So thank you for being here. I want to give you a little introduction. You know, that's what we did before. So native Washingtonian, Ward 4 resident, someone who ran for office, someone who's stayed in the community post-election. You know, somebody who I think of, when I think of a leader in DC, I think of Reggie Black. You're the co-chair for Emergency Response and Shelter Operations Committee and the Consumer Engagement Work Group. So thanks so much for being here, brother.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. And we want to get to our next question. And like I said before, for anyone that came in, if anybody has a question that they want to just get to next, please let me know. Does anybody have a question? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, following what you said earlier, I'm Morgan Jameson. I'm actually the former representative for the Young Democrats of America to the DNC. And now I'm the CEO of the Quality Chamber of Commerce here for the region. And with our, being the most queer city in America, we also have a disproportional amount of LGBT folks who are experiencing housing insecurity. What what is it that your organization is doing, or what is it that you all are advocating for the most intersectional community here in the area, as I'm advocating for, better jobs and opportunities to afford those housing opportunities? What are those housing opportunities that exist, and what are you doing to target the LGBTQ community?
I mean, I can, but. Alrighty, so, and I'm pretty sure you probably see the same thing. In DC, we passed what's called the Human Rights Enhancement Act. Especially for those who are housing insecure, there's section 23, which adds homelessness to every protected trait, even the sexual orientation trait, under the DC Human Rights Act of 1977. And that gives us just a tool to be able to use, to gain income. There's no way around like having something for rent. Even, voucher holders have to put in at least 30% of their income for rent. So this is just another tool that people who are housing unstable can use. And then these subpopulations, whether that's political affiliation, sexual orientation, gender, those things, if a person perceives discrimination, they can take out a human rights complaint and either have full litigation levied or mediation, in which there may be, cash settlements, and then that's a tool to help get that person in the housing. This is one of the things that, all of us have been working on to make sure that there's like equality and equity and everything. I think there's a new facility for people who are like transgender and, those types of things, but still you have to have parity in that. Like I've been in the system myself, and, as a cisgender male, it's kind of weird to have, like, I can't move around between the hours of 9 a.m. and 5. And then a whole nother subpopulation can come and go as they please. So we want to make sure that there's, streamlined with that. And if, we have flexible shelter hours, everybody should have that, right? And so these are the tenets that we want to make sure that we push. And now we're trying to get people who are like first responders into the whole intake process of human rights complaints. So if you have people that perceive discrimination or have issues, tied to their sexual orientation, then we should be working together to make sure that we have the process in place for them to be able to use the tools. Because DC, quote unquote, feels itself as a human rights city. So if people are being locked out or whatever, we should have to mitigate that. So we use the Office of Human Rights, for now. But that's just one tool. We need much more.
So I was gonna say something, not at all that, so we'll just completely say different things. I mean, so Reggie and I have worked on a lot of the discrimination laws together for years to try to make those work better for people. And shelters are often just a bad place for anyone to be, but I think they're particularly bad for people, particularly of multiple marginalized identities. But I mean, particularly transgender people have had to, make a choice because they're gender segregated shelters. Like, do I go to a men's shelter? Do I go to a women's shelter? And both of them carry their risks. For years ago, I think we worked on one of the first transgender policies and shelters in the country to talk about how staff interact with people and that sort of thing. I will tell you that I don't think it was a success, in the sense that we still see a lot of people who don't go into shelter because they don't feel comfortable there. So whatever we did, well, it might have been like progressive at the time, it was not really what people needed, because we do a lot of outreach to encampments. We work a lot with people on the street. See a lot of people on the street who are there because shelters don't work for them. So, either they're too crowded, they don't feel safe, the rules are too strict and they don't work for them. Or because honestly, they're just these huge communal spaces where you have no privacy. And if you are someone who is, worried about your safety in that situation, it's just not a good setting. And sometimes people feel safer in tents. And so a lot of what we try to do at the legal clinic is push for, like I said, housing being the solution, but also we push for shelters to be low barrier, better services, better conditions, but also more privacy and safety. Like for years, we have pushed, even prior to the pandemic, to have non-congregate spaces for singles. To have spaces where people could have their own bathroom or have their own door to close and have some privacy. We're starting to see some progress in that area, but not enough. We still sort of warehouse people. We have these giant shelters with, thousands and thousand people in them. And, real estate is expensive, but in the city, it's not necessarily a priority to build new shelters for single homeless men and women. So there's some of the challenges we face. We haven't quite cracked that nut. And on the family side, I still see a lot of people who are LGBTQ and have children who are kicked out of their houses by their families. And they often have a hard time accessing shelter because they don't have, they're told they can't come in with their girlfriend or their boyfriend, or they're told that they should try to make it work with mom, even though mom has completely rejected that person because of their identity. So we at the Legal Clinic on nearly a daily basis, we talk to families with a night shelter and we advocate to get them into safe shelter. And that's sort of like a subset of that work that I think is, to your point, is particularly critical, that people get safe spaces. It's not often recognized how much intra-family conflict and violence there is in the sort of like host or original homes of people who are LGBTQ, and how much of that is actually a cause of homelessness. Even by the people who are there to serve people who are homeless, there's often just like not a real understanding of that.
Okay, my name is Andrew Anderson, and I worked as an outreach director, specifically for people who are unhoused, and currently we're in the city dealing with, I won't use the word pandemic, that's a little bit, but we're dealing with a crisis where we're having people from other countries come in, undocumented, as we know, migrants. Migrants at this level of this crisis is using resources that were allocated for, or supposed to be allocated for our unhoused neighbors. So my question is, how would we quickly move from or build a bridge to better get our unhoused neighbors qualified for some level of housing? Specifically be like either like rapid rehousing or permanent supported housing. That is becoming a hotbed issue in the city, along with crime and everything else that we're finding. But the housing issue has become complicated and compounded by other issues. And the migrants that are coming to the city is sort of like highlighted as an issue that's been sort of dealt with on a higher level. And it actually kind of left out people who are already unhoused in the city. So how do we build that bridge? How can we create a safety net that will quickly get them from point A to point B, where they will eventually get keys to their own place? And that's for the whole town, not just one. But
I definitely, appreciate you asked that. And just like, one question with Jim, like Service City and other folks around the table, like People with Fairness, we provide the tools for people who are out on the street. We make sure that they have the safety materials. And this thing with the migrants, it's surprising to me that they're like volunteer housing services and all these different things from people in the community who have been there. So I always ask myself, like, okay, where was that 10, 12 years ago when I was homeless? And so my thing is, the bridge is, if there are extra services for people who are coming from other places in which we had no control over now. You got two people who have no connection to the District of Columbia at all of a sudden finagling their way with policy and getting money redirected. So we need to create those same apparatuses and supports for people who are our usual HSRA clients, people who are natives like myself, who experience homelessness for 5 and 6, 8, 9, and 10 years. I feel like those residents are first. I look at I look at a lot of times the inflow data we recorded, I think it was maybe 16 or 17, and we're seeing these extravagant numbers of people coming in from other states. And it frustrates me because DC does more for its most vulnerable residents, and a lot of times it's not as successful as we want. But then that's more than like a state like California does. That's more than like a state like Louisiana does or Colorado, who are coming around to it, but we're the nation's capital. So other cities need to follow our example. I think that's one way to start bridging that is like really get hard on some of these other cities and states and say, look, we're the nation's capital. We're doing way more, spending way more money, right? You should be doing this. This is a great suggestion. We've been able to pull death rates down. We've been able to, you know, and slightly reduce our level of housing instability in the District of Columbia. So we need to make sure that the things that we do here for our indigenous homeless refugees are the same as, you know, other refugees and migrants coming in from other places. We have to have balance. So if you're going to do something over here special for them, do it also for the long-term residents. If you go for FEMA funding for them over here, go for FEMA funding over there. And this is what I hear from my peers all the time. You can't do anything for them without somebody who's been here 5 or 6 years saying, well, why didn't you do that for me 2 years ago? So that's what we have to do. Whatever you do over here, you got to do over there. It's like an algebra equation.
So, I totally agree, like, we gotta expand the pie, we gotta meet the need. A couple points of that, just to be clear, is that we actually haven't used any local money for, this month. It's all been federal money. To your point, it's been FEMA money. And we've also used FEMA money for people who are homeless with the hotels during the pandemic. So it's not a lot more than we've used, for the immigrants. The other thing is out there, these are people seeking asylum. So I nobody said this, but I just want to say it because people say it to us sometimes, is that they'll say like these are illegal immigrants. They aren't. If they were illegal, they would have been thrown back over the border. These are people who are actually following the legal process of seeking asylum or refuge in this country. So they have immigration cases that are pending. They're going through the process. They are following the rules that we have set out for them. But I just want to be clear about that because they aren't, you know, they're people who are doing like exactly what this country is supposed to do. And a connection to statehood is we don't have any control over our immigration policy in DC. Like we don't have any vote on that. So we don't even get to say like what we think the right immigration policy is. And I get that frustration. And this was, the migrants that were bused here were a political point by Republican governors trying to say, oh, blue cities, oh, Democrats, you think you're so progressive on immigration. Let's see how you feel when you have to deal with immigrants. And do you know what we did as a city? We played right into that playbook. We were like, yeah, we don't want to deal with immigrants. And we said, I'm not gonna say, wait, I did not say this. Our politicians that we elected, who call themselves Democrats, passed a law that said these are not the same. The same day they passed a law giving undocumented immigrants the right to vote in this city, passed a law saying they are not equal to other people experiencing homelessness. They will be excluded and turned away from shelters and housing. They have no path to housing in this city. So they are not getting any access to housing resources. They're kept segregated. They're giving less services, less resources than anyone else. No one would even help them sign their kids up for school or give them food or access to healthcare when they got here, except mutual aid folks who showed up with buses and served them. And there is a question of I get what you're saying, Raji, and I hear it. I want to like sit with it and think about it. I just think that I want us to take that and say, so we help everyone more, not so that we turn some people away or we segregate them based on the country they came from.
I definitely appreciate that. And that's our point over in Silver City. We ran out of food. We ran out of supplies, not choosing between. But then at the same time, like, you know, we've been in the community helping our residents the entire time, people we know who've been here 3 and 4 years, right? It's not that anyone's being excluded, right? We're saying that, with me, definitely saying that, okay, if you're gonna do something special and add stuff here, it gotta be for HSRA too, because this is what I get hammered about. You know, I don't know,
Worry that they're getting-
you know,
They're getting way less. than
and the
anybody else.
less is pissing off my residents.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? The less and the talk and the narrative, them not even being looked at. You know what I mean? You should hear what a lot of the folks in the first and in other places are saying about this. They're angry because they feel like the narrative is gone just to them and no one's really, you know, talking about people being stagnant in the system, not, you know, people not being able to earn the income, again, with the discrimination and not having resources.
Can I add one thing to that? I think, and so the displaced residents, one extreme, but you talked about, how long-term residents that own their home are feeling, forgotten, or these programs aren't for them. And I'm an example, I talk all the time, that as the housing goes sky high, my family has been in the same house for 50 years. And it is insane what I pay on taxes, and that's another way to get minority, long-term residents out of their homes, because it's ridiculous, you know, what you're paying in taxes with no discount, you're at 65, and, you know, all these different things. And not only that, the new residents, and I'm talking about just, immigrant residents, get their neighborhood degrees. I mean, I can start a long list of why were these grocery stores here when there were Latino and African Americans? Why are you taking all the parking? No offense, bikers, but why are you taking all the parking for people who are handicapped, for people who have to drive? I mean, you know, so there's other issues, but who's listening to the long-term residents about their needs and about their concerns? And it's great that the Starbucks on every corner, but why isn't there daycare? So I'm gonna stop.
Wait, we got one question here, then I got you, Shika. Wait, you have a question?
Yes, good evening, everyone. My name is Paul McGough. I'm the chair of the Ward 2 Democrats. First and foremost, I wanted to thank my colleagues in Ward 6 for putting this on, the Young Dems. I wish I still qualified as one. But I will say the ARP Dems. I think what I'm hearing is what we're talking about fundamentally is a system that is utterly and completely broken.
Yeah.
In every facet of it, right? And I say this as an individual living with a disability. So when you're talking about individuals that are unhoused, members of the LGBTQ+ community, think of it this way. I read an article this past week about a woman, native Washingtonian, single mother, whose son was shot in the head like a year or so ago. He is basically in a facility. However, he is wheelchair bound. Exactly. Exactly. My thing is this, I'm blessed that, you know, I can walk on these legs as bad as they are. But think of it this way. Imagine, you know, we're discussing about affordable housing. Affordable is what you can pick out of your pocket every month, period, in the story. Imagine if you have a disability that requires you to have larger doorways, accessible bathroom and toilets, so on and so forth. That pool becomes even smaller. The largest minority on the planet are people with disabilities. There's the physical that we can see, and especially that we cannot see. However, my thing is this. Fundamentally, unless we organize ourselves and collectively say that when we address the issue of affordable housing, everyone is part of this conversation, we're not going to solve anybody's issue. What can we do to help you? Basically just do the godly work that you've been doing. Because I'm familiar with what you all do. But what can we do as members of the general public to help further this along? Because ultimately, whether we believe it or not, we are all going to be susceptible to that one question. Can we afford to live here? You know, I've been here 17 years. I just accepted a new position. I start at the end of the month. I will be making a nice amount of money. Despite the fact that my wife also makes a nice amount of money, I really have to think twice about whether I can afford to stay. It shouldn't be in the nation's capital, like he said. We should be setting the tone for the rest of the country, not the other way around. So what can we do to help you? What do you do?
So I feel like the most important thing for me to say, not in any way in my capacity as someone who works at a 501c3, who has restrictions in electioneering, is as like Democrats, like people who identify as Democrats, be careful that you look beyond the party identification of your elected leaders. Because everyone in the city identifies as a Democrat, and very few ascribe to the values that I think we all in this room would agree are like democratic values. So, we have a mayor in her 3rd term now, who very, very much, if you take that D away and you listen to her policies on the issues of economic justice, like really these issues, like affordability, she sounds like a Republican. So you have to listen beyond that. And that doesn't mean she's if you ask her where does she stand on like gay rights or abortion, she probably is on the Democratic platform. But in this city, people are sort of more progressive on social issues than they are on economic issues. And so you really have to look beyond party affiliation. You have to key in, you have to pay attention. Can't just take people at your words. Politicians, they know what to say. You got to look beyond that. You got to look at how they vote. This last election, I had to get off Twitter for a while at all the people running for election who are proclaiming to be the most amazing affordable housing advocates that you've ever seen. And then I was like, I know how you voted on those things. Like you voted against a tax increase for rich people that was going to fund ending homelessness. And then you're claiming that you are so progressive on affordable housing. You just have to look beyond how people identify and how they claim they are on things. And I think like get keyed into groups that do this work, to groups that know what's happening, who are down at the Wilson building and know what to look beyond the rhetoric, like follow the people. I kind of made a big deal about not taking public money at the beginning, because in this city, there are a lot of people out there who take public money, and our mayor is very tightly controlling of those contractors. And so, you just they'll probably have a private conversation with you where they'll tell you the truth. But a lot of times you see the people who take public money line up right behind the mayor on things. And you have to sort of think, you have to just be like more analytical and thoughtful about like, oh, why are you taking that position? It's not what I expected, considering that, the clients you serve and the work that you do. So I think just get engaged, I think, and pay attention to the budget. I mean, I know, like I've worked on the budget for years, but the budget is the most important piece of legislation that the council passes. It is how you see the priorities of every single elected official. Like where, like put your money where your mouth is. Where do they spend their money? Do they spend it on dog parks and bike lanes? Do they spend it on affordable housing and social services? Like, where do they put their priorities when it comes time to putting money out there? And like, you have a role in that. You can go to budget hearings, you can testify, you can call your council member. You can ask me afterwards about your particular council members and where they stand on things, and I will tell you. I think we're being recorded, so I'm not gonna say it.
I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. It's better off the record. It's more colorful. But like ask people like me who will tell you the truth, people like Reggie who will tell you the truth. Obviously we have our own biases. I think they're well-grounded in experience, right? I will give anyone a second chance. There is not one politician who hasn't disappointed me out there. And there is, like, that's just how it is. But there are people who vote the right way more often than not. And there are people who vote the wrong way more often than not. And like, you have to educate yourself and talk to yourself.
It's fine. I agree with everything you just said with this one caveat. whatever you testify to, however you engage, make sure that you get to know an impacted person, listen to them, embody the solutions that they give you, and support them to create and produce that solution, because that solution is rooted in somebody who's directly impacted by the decision being made. And this is what Surrey City, People Fairness Coalition, and other groups that have that unique lived experience specialize in, and you should support those groups. You should, like I said, you can give your time, you can give your money. Right now, we got a wish list out for encampment residents in which, you know, they need tents, they need heaters, they need, you know, they still need, we're still in COVID, believe it or not, but they still need masks, they still need baby wipes, they still need hand sanitizer. You know, these are things that you can do right now. And then with the politics of it all, if you root it in someone with lived experience, it's more of a tool to have that person who is impacted with you and leading that and making sure that they're being properly supported and propped up as the solution creator. Like, that's the whole, you know, thing. If you've ever looked at the organizational chart for the District of Columbia, it has the mayor here, it's got everybody here, residents, all of us. We're over. Now, I don't think people will understand. So we have to root that in, you know, the people who are most impacted by these policies. When you're talking about housing stable folks, it isn't just homeless people, it's public housing folks, it's a lot of the rent burden folks too. And like the lady was saying, a lot of these folks with these high mortgages and taxes, you know, property taxes that they're facing. These folks are the ones with the solutions and know exactly what it is that they need, and what people who have some resources or have methods of support should be supporting that narrative and making sure that those people are out in front. However, you know, they are specifying they want to be out front, and that's, you know, what each individual can do. Time, money, human resources, and make sure that lived experience is number one, following that leadership.
Gotcha, we have a question.
If I can add on real quick.
Wait, 1 second, I got.
I wanted to chime in. So one, my name is Shika Reed. I'm a member of the Young Dems. I have been for a while, and I'm currently a member of the Democratic State Committee. But my family has actually done the work in building affordable housing. And one of the things that I have to say is that it's very, very difficult. I mean, when you're going to banks who generally will finance a regular condo building, they'll do that all day. But when you go and approach and say, hey, you know, we're doing this, we're putting together federal financing, we're putting together money from the Housing Production Trust Fund. I mean, when you put all these things together, it took them 4 years longer to do for one building that was about 70 units. But and they didn't do it alone. They were the local part of a larger team, but it's a very, very difficult and nuanced issue. And I think a lot of the time, and one of the biggest things was they currently have units for people with disabilities. And the thing that at ANC committee meetings, people were saying is, I don't want these people in my neighborhood. I don't want these people in my community. So showing up and advocating is the #1 tool that we all have in our artillery. And I think that a lot of times people, there are these divides politically that make people feel like they don't have the ability or the resources to be able to advocate. And so to answer that, staying connected with organizations who are doing the work on the ground is #1, but showing up and supporting, providing testimony, speaking, if there's someone who's unhoused who you can help write a testimony, that's the support that moves the needle forward and helps with the funding and the helping move the structure, because it's a political structure. There's not one thing that anyone can do to change all of it, but we can work with it and move the needle forward.
Can I add something to that really important point? And Reggie, if I'm volunteering you for something, I apologize. But like, you got an encampment in your neighborhood, and maybe like it has some trash outside or something that like don't call the mayor's office. Like, call Serve Your City. call someone who's actually gonna do something to fix the problem without displacing the people who live there, because what happens is neighbors often, I think, okay, half and half, sometimes they're well-intentioned, sometimes they just don't wanna look at people who are poor. But sometimes they're well-intentioned about it, and they're like, I'll call the mayor's office, and what the mayor does is a sweep and clears, and people lose all their stuff. And so just like, it's just like, do you wanna call the cops for like this minor thing that is happening without thinking about what the consequences are? Do you wanna call the mayor's office on an encampment? Or do you wanna like try to learn who in your neighborhood, where are the mutual aid people, where are the Serve Your City people in your neighborhood? Who can be, where are the like, outreach programs in your neighborhood that can be brought to bear to like help the people fix whatever the issue is that you're looking at. And when those shelters open up that we're talking about, going to that ANC meeting and saying like, yes, please, I want this shelter in my neighborhood. I want to be the kind of community that welcomes people of all income levels. Like, oh my God, I love you forever.
Yeah.
Your biggest fan.
Yes, definitely. And, you know, we talked about having, sort of like a progressive trash collection and systems for encampments. And, you know, that's something that we suggested. First thing and foremost is being able to build a relationship with those residents and then say, hey, you know, how many times a week can I come by and just provide you trash bags? Right? Or, you know, is there a day that we can come and do, you know, how they, and I'm glad you mentioned the ANC, because the ANC will do, you know, sidewalk cleanups all the time, but how many times are they volunteering to help camping residents get rid of trash and things like that? And I'm glad you mentioned the ANC. I hold these commissioners to the fire. It's 2,000 of y'all, per one commissioner. And y'all gotta hold them, you know, accountable. These, look, starting with the ANC commissioner, if they don't vote your way, there got to be some ramifications for that. You can go knock on the door, pull up. See what I'm saying? So you need to make sure that all of the elected officials you got, you know, it's sometimes these commissioners. That's right. That's right. A lot of times you gotta hold people to the fire, which may mean you gotta get 50, 60 of your neighbors to say, no, we gonna talk about this right now. And this is what this 50 and 60 neighbors want. Right? We voted you in office to represent what the 50 and 60 residents want. See, I'm a grassroots guy, right? The people who are on the ground gotta be running it, right? And those people who are impacted, you should help them create these plans and initiatives and, you know, help them. And the person who's in a representative seat, that's what they should represent. They gotta represent the people, not themselves.
It's like accountability is so important. I mean, I'm gonna make myself sound super petty. I don't care. The family shelter in my neighborhood, the ANC commissioner who voted against the family shelter, he lost his his next election by 1 vote, and it brought me great joy. And he waves at me, and I look at him, and my daughter says, "Is that the guy we don't like?" And I was like, "Oh, that's the guy." So yeah, awesome election though, didn't he?
The someone who won by 1 vote in his first election. So for the sake of time, I want, if there's a few more questions out there, I want you all to ask your question, but it won't be answered directly. So once we have all the questions, then you can choose what you want to answer and what your comments are. So I noticed you had.
No, it was more of a comment, but you know, the funny thing is, she mentioned something very incredible, in the sense that her family has been involved in creating affordable housing. But the perception of that housing and the people that were inhabited directly affected how quickly that project was completed. My background is in public relations. I've been doing that for 30 years, for everybody from Fortune 100s all the way down to mom and pops. You know, we're talking about, the gentleman in front of me here mentioned the migrants. Part of the reason why they're getting so much attention is because they get a lot of press. You know, remember, this is a news cycle situation. If we, you know, unfortunately, the perception of individuals that are unhoused is often that it is their own fault. Often the perception of the poor is that it's their own fault. They should have gotten a better education, should have done this, should have done that. My mother had a 3rd grade education, my father had an 11th grade education. Okay. My family makes 6 figures. We grew up from nothing. You know, it's no doubt, no doubt. But what I'm saying to you here is that it's important that we are self-conscious of our own personal biases as we navigate these conversations, like it or not. Because we have to get beyond that if we are going to solve the greater problem that we have. All of us are susceptible to initial affordability in this town. And I say this because I grew up in Washington Heights. I'm not talking about Lin-Manuel Miranda's Washington Heights. That's the 90s. Talking about the 70s and 80s. My Washington Heights would not have made a music. My mother's old apartment, the market rate for that apartment in the hood, blocking knuckleheads, is more expensive than what I pay to rent on 15th and Rhode Island. Put that in context. And I have, you know, I make a good income, I'm blessed. But imagine those of us that are struggling, that are doing hourly wage jobs, working downstairs in these restaurants that we just walk past. You know, what I'm saying is generally just, you know, let's put it into context and hopefully we can all start working together here to help further this, because what we're doing for others, you know, in this effort, ultimately it will positively affect us as well. We will benefit. We may not see it directly, but we will definitely benefit from this work if we decide to join in.
Thank you. 2 more comments. If you make it quick, let's make it 3. Go ahead.
I had a question. I had my hand raised.
Yeah, go ahead.
But, my name is Pastor Michael Campbell at Peace Fellowship Church in, Ward 7, inside of Idea Public Charter School. However, I grew up in Ward 6 right here, it's on the gardens, probably. My grandmother, grandfather, everything there, my aunt had a wedding on Wilson Church, trumpets on the guys in the newspaper. But, anyway, my question is in pertaining to what we talked about before with the average median income. And after having conversations with a couple of candidates, Michael Williams and Wendy Hamilton, who was running against Eleanor Roosevelt, we were kind of thinking and brainstorming. And one of the things that I thought about is how can we put pressure on our lawmakers the same way we do with DC statehood. We can put pressure on our lawmakers to change how they come up with our city's average median income. I think that right there makes a huge difference when it comes to household income.
Gotcha. Great question. But before we wrap up, just one more.
I actually have a question from somebody who wasn't able to make it, and I wanted to.
Go ahead.
So first off, by way of introduction, Maggie Edwards, co-chair of the Young Dems of Ward 6. Thank you all for coming. My question is from Hugh Allen, who's a Ward 3 resident. And this is what he sent me. He asked, do the panelists know the status of the city achieving the mayor's 2019 goal of producing 36,000 housing units, of which 12,000 units will be affordable housing?
So answer all those questions. What about AMI? What about performance?
I just have one question to that.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, make it quick. Make it quick.
Real quick.
All right.
So Cameron Griffith, Ward 5, so I'm playing, I'm not what's here. But full disclosure, I'm a realtor, I'm a developer as well. And I think one of the issues that I don't really hear discussed here as much, is what inventory is happening to DC and how it's driving the overall market and like supply and demand is happening in the city. Because I think that DC right now we're at like high 600,000 residents, right? But there's anticipated adding 300,000 by 2030. So what does that look like for the current housing market and how will that affect affordability going forward? Other than, you know, I think what people are seeing now is the reason why all these areas are being rezoned and rezoned for like commercial use is to kind of meet a future demand. And obviously I think to that point too, a key component of that is affordable housing, but it's not going to take the main stock of it. But I think for us, and I'm just putting, you know, my hat on with it, one of the hardest parts for us to get involved in certain communities is like price as a factor, right? So like the incentives that are driving us is like to help bring us to market, because ultimately what's driving decisions that we would make would be like, you know, what if it's profitable. And I'm not saying profitable from strictly like a return on capital, but profitable like from an equitable standpoint, because we do affordable housing. And again, what does that look like over the next couple of years with an increase that we're expecting to see over the next probably 10 years?
Whichever, or
I'll answer the easiest thing first, which is that I think it was 36,000 by 2025 and 12,000 were affordable, which goes back to your fund. So our question was like, what do you mean by affordable? And never got a lot of detail on that, and there was never any like breakdown of like to whom at each level. There's all, I do not think that metric is gonna be met or that goal is gonna be met, and then to your point, that still wouldn't get us anywhere near the 600,000 that you're talking about. But I think like I think I also just really want to like reframe that. I don't love goals like that when they are connected to people, because yeah, you talk about 600,000 new people coming in. Well, how many people leave in that time period, and who are they? Are they all low-income Black residents of like they have been the last, you know, couple decades in DC? Like that's a problem. That's why you see that chocolate city is not really very chocolatey anymore, right? Like it is definitely diminished over time. And so like, to me, it matters more like, are we doing it in a way that is, you know, allowing people of like all income bands to stay here and for people to grow, like for people to grow old in the city. So that means accessible housing, that means low-income housing. People have kids, so that means bigger housing. You know, like those are things that like, those are ways I want us to be thoughtful about growing our city. So it's not just being like, bring a bunch of new people in, and then like, we're just cycling them back out as soon as they have kids or as soon as they get another job or whatever. But like, it's weird to me. Maybe it's because I grew up in Arizona. Arizona is a weird state, but like, there aren't a lot, I mean, there are transplants, but then they stay. There's not this churning that happens in DC. So DC, it's weird to me that there hasn't been more investment in keeping people. Like, to me, that's the better goal. Like, who's here now? Do you want to stay? How do we make this a city that you can stay in, that you can commit to and invest in and like build your community? So I don't know, that was like way more philosophical than your actual question. That's just me like not answering the question because I don't know the answer. I think I'm not supposed to admit that if I really get these things. Reggie has all the answers.
Yeah, because I'm from DC and I've been homeless. And so like talking about, you know, first the pressuring of, you know, elected officials, you gotta show up at these hearings. You gotta support grassroots organizing. I'm glad the pastor back here said that, because institutions like churches, have to be hubs for that. Not just for some of the political stuff, but as, you know, the missing factor is the economics. You gotta be able to bring people who are struggling in and help them, like I say, create plans and stuff that they can push. When you're talking about like, when you're talking about like this 36,000 in the inventory, I gotta say this, like the word affordable is currently co-opted. If you look at and really do the math on the $15 minimum wage, which we just got, which was proposed and voted on in 2013. In 2013, the housing market had already outpaced $15. So you have to understand that in the context of affordable housing, that word is co-opted because, like I said before, the incomes don't really match up. And when we're talking about the status of these 36,000 and 12,000 affordable, that is tied to the comprehensive plan. And for you homeowners, people that living in DC, you really need to, you know, draw that down. It's a 1,500-page document in which there are policy action steps and all those things in it. But one of the things that Chairman tried to push, which I think is just oversimplified, but what you need to look at is the future land use map. Now, there was all this rhetoric to our Ward 3 residents. There was all this rhetoric about Ward 3 doing their share and them needing more density and all of these things. But yet, if you look at that future land use map, the entire city is blown out. So if you had a focus on Ward 3, why is the entire city blown out? Why are areas like in Ward 7, where homeowners live who have these mid-sized homes, why is now their density up to moderate? right? Why is that so high? You know, those types of things. And then for Ward 3 residents, 36,000 to 12,000, let's just take the 12,000. What's up with Boardman? Let's get that site, you know what I'm saying? And do something transformative like social housing right there in Ward 3. That continues to be a missed opportunity, and you should not let Cartwheel Partners go forward with that plan over there until they produce a social housing model for that community that's going to help people who are unhoused in that Connecticut Avenue corridor and downtown and in Adams Morgan. Like, that's where Ward 3 residents should be with that. And as far as inventory goes, to my relative friend there, had to take a breather because like this one's going to sting a bit, but it's going to help. So with the inventory, I know that there are over 10,000 vacant units here in the District of Columbia. One third of which are Class A, built within the last 7 years. You own like 2 of them. So you need to produce those units for the homeless services system and other folks. There's an entire plan called Vacant to Virus Reduction Plan, which was created in the pandemic by folks of lived experience. That plan pairs mutual aid networks like Ward 6 with unhoused residents who can then get into a vacant unit. And the CFO reports these vacant units every month. They're still trying to hide it, but in the pandemic, 2021, height of the pandemic, January, 19,000 units. Now the CFO said it was a problem. In the beginning of the pandemic, 2020, this is June, there are 10,000 units. That's a healthy market. So you're telling me 10,000 homeless people in a year is a healthy market? If you really don't feel that, then we all have to work together. This is why it takes grassroots organizing. We need the realtors in there saying, okay, I got X number of units, I'm gonna give them mine, right? We need the people who are, you know, helping to support encampment residents and doing, you know, proactive cleanups to build those relationships to say, okay, we have this landlord or whoever who could help you, and then force, you know, our elected officials and our, you know, and our systems to help house them, to get on that advocacy front to make sure that they have the resource to access the already identified unit. If we already have an identified unit already, then that is having a battle right there. We just need to get the money in there. And, you know, far as like the biases and things like that. Now you know, that people want return on investments and all of that. Now tell me, if that's the case, then why tell me the poor are strong in spirit, theirs is the kingdom of heaven, and that you do for the least of these, you stuck up more for you in heaven. Why tell me that? Why tell me that if that's what you believe return on investment? Now what the word said, that's what you live by, right? Hey, that's how it's gotta go. If we're gonna live by certain creeds and codes, that's what we gotta live by and not deviate. And anyone that does, you gotta call them out. Do you really with that? Because you can't say that and be there. You can't serve two masters.
Are you saying support the ward plan as the proposed plan is now, or?
No.
Okay.
So there is, in Ward 3, there's 3 groups. So
Okay.
there's the specific Wardman Hotel Strategy Team. They meet every Tuesday. And I'm pretty sure there are ways we can get you in contact with those folks. There's also the Ward 3 Housing Justice Working Group, who's working on all of the sites, including Wardman, Chevy Chase Recreation Center, Mazda Gallery, trying to make sure that you have actual affordable housing in Ward 3 to match up with, you know, a lot of the comments that are being made about Ward 3. And you also have the Northwest Opportunity Partners Development Corporation, who is trying to be the engine of producing that affordable housing. And, you know, Wardman Park Hotel presents a perfect opportunity to take a look at Janice's social housing provisions in the Green New Deal and avatar that right on the Wardman site. I know the people who helped create that. And, you know, people have even said, and she's even said, that Wardman Park basically is the avatar for that. We want to do social housing. If we have to deviate from things like public housing, I know you're from the gardens, If we have to deviate from public housing, then let's create social housing, which is the same thing. People come in, the incomes help someone else afford housing. Like, we need to create those models.
Gotcha. Well, before we close down, I want a big spotlight to some people who are already in this room, and also give them a chance to come up in the front and say a couple of words. First is Ward 66, Elizabeth Engel, as well as our chair of the DC Democratic Party, Charles. So I want y'all to come up here if y'all can say a couple of words. Come up to the Democrats to talk about housing affordability here in DC. So, not further.
Sorry, Brooke, we also, we also do Ward 2 chair.
I was gonna say
Are we able to get everybody?
No, it didn't have to be on Twitter.
So I'm, as Repo mentioned, I am, Elizabeth Engel, I'm the chair of the Ward 6 Democrats, and I just wanted to thank everybody for turning out tonight. I want to thank our panelists, our moderator, our Young Dems, leaders who put this together. We're very glad to do this, and we are you have fun as well, right? Yeah, out with the States. Yeah. Yeah. So really hard work went into making this happen. And I want to thank everyone for doing that. And to thank all of you for showing up to talk about such an important issue in our community on a random Wednesday night, sorry. And bring your questions and your good observations about what we need to do to help everyone who wants to live here be able to live here in a place where they are safe, where they have dignified housing, and where they are respected and loved. So thank you.
Well, Elizabeth, thank you for hosting us here. Reminder, this is the part one of a two-part series. Yeah. So we're gonna continue the conversation. So keep an eye out for the next date. Hope to see you over on our side of the city. But, the fact of the matter is that, all of us are here today, in some way, shape, or form, we can all count ourselves as blessed. Remember that. There are people out here tonight, outside these windows, that don't have it as good as we do. So like somebody who's a little worse off. But the fact that you're here means a great deal too, and will impact a great many individuals in the city. That's very important. As Democrats, we have to live our values, but we also have to act upon those values. So, one of the things that we, as we mentioned here, is that we have to be on the ground, and our chairman has been very adamant about stressing that as Democrats, we are on the ground and doing the good work of helping our fellow men and women out here in DC. And hopefully this is a catalyst to continue to do that. And I'm glad to do it alongside all of you. Thank you.
So good evening, everyone. My name is Charles Wilson. I have the honor of being chair of the DC Democratic Party. And special shout out to Elizabeth and Juan and the Young Dems for hosting this. When I saw the flyer come out, I was like, wow, I gotta make this. And even Monica said, hey, you coming? I was like, yeah, I'm gonna be there. I had to do the kid drop off before, the shuffle before I came. But I think it was back in December we met as a party. I think it was December. And one of our members brought up, said, hey, we really do, as a party, need to really engage in this whole housing conversation. And we started the year off with Robert White, who's now overseeing that committee. And I was actually talking to Hugh Allen. I was surprised he's not here tonight from Ward 3.
He was unable to be in person. He was the Ward 3 resident, got a question.
Yeah, and he said, he has some ideas. Hey, Charles, I want to throw out some ideas that the entire party can really get engaged in this conversation. I'm just excited that it's starting tonight. It's going to continue. I'm going to have every ward kind of engaged in this conversation. I live in Ward 8. I've lived in Ward 8 for about 17 years. And so I have a perspective that before I got in this role, I was very much a community advocate. I live in the Anacostia Historic District, so I'm really fight the power type government guy. And I have the scars to prove it. And that as neighbors, we have, the frustration is affordable housing is not a priority in all parts of the city. And as neighbors, we get frustrated that every housing development that comes to Ward 8 is 100% affordable. Which we only have one grocery store for 70,000 people. There's something wrong with that. And it's been that way for 17 years. So I'm so excited about the conversation tonight and the conversation that we're going to continue to have. And we're going to move our meetings around the city so people, everyday folks can really engage in the conversation and connect with the party. So thank you guys so much for hosting it.
Over to Maggie for our next steps.
Yeah, so cool. So first off, thank you all for joining us tonight for, as Juan mentioned, part 1 of 2. But you don't have to wait until part 2 is scheduled and planned to continue this conversation. We're gonna head on downstairs to the Roost, if you want to get a bite to eat, something to drink, continue the conversation a bit more informally, but also, meet some of your neighbors who also care so much about the issue of housing affordability here in the district. Also, I do want to, recognize Howard. And also Ankit, from the ward, Young Dems of Ward 2, who have been great to partner with in planning this event. And I know Howard wanted to step in and recognize folks who are here from the Blackboard Apartments.
Good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Howard Garrett. I am a Ward 2 Democrat. Again, thank you guys for coming out on your Wednesday night to participate in a series about a needed conversation. As we heard, there's a huge issue going on in our city with the system that honestly needs to be dismantled and built back up to ensure that it represents all of us. And that's why this is a series. For the next conversation will be more based on solutions. Because we can say issues all day, but if we don't talk about solutions, then we won't get anywhere. So I do encourage you to bring your friends. If you know anyone that is living in these experiences, I think they should definitely have a seat at the table, because if we leave those people out, then our whole discussion and our solutions will be based upon what we think and not with how we can help the people who are living these day-to-day issues on a day-to-day basis. So again, thank you so much for coming. I do want to finally recognize the May Riegler team, who is the owner of this building, who's graciously allowed us to host here without cost and have opened up their doors to us. So if you want to say anything, Rosalind, please feel free to say.
There's nothing like being put on the spot. Well, hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Rosalind Carey. As you mentioned, I'm part of the May Riegler team. We are the proud owners and managers of this building. We are, glad that you all reached out, and we're happy to host this event here tonight. We definitely think this is a meaningful work that you all are doing, and we'd love to have you back. Thank you.
So before everyone heads out, we just want to say, if you like these kinds of conversations, want to hear more, or just want to hang out with other Young Democrats, we have a sign-in sheet right there. That's sign-in sheets for Young Democrats of Ward 2 or Young Democrats of Ward 6, or honestly, just the Democrats in general. We can make sure you're situated with the right people. So yeah, we'd love to have you sign up for us. I should introduce myself. I'm Ankit Jain. I'm president of Young Democrats of Ward 2. So we're so glad to have you here today, and sign in, and let's go downstairs and eat some food and great stuff. Thanks, everyone. I'm with Ward 2. She's Ward 6.